Hello, everyone. I'm Mohammed Tawakkuli, the inaugural director of the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies at the University of Toronto. I welcome you all to another exciting session of the Institute's Iranian Studies book launch featuring Mahnaz Afkhami and her newly released book, The Other Side of Silence, a Memoir of Exile, Iran, and the Global Women's Movement. We are grateful to Roshan Cultural Heritage Institute for funding the establishment of the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute at the University of Toronto. At the outset, I also like to express our solidarity with the inspiring women's movement in Iran and our collective gratitude to Canada's Indigenous people and acknowledge this land on which the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of Credit River. Today, this meeting place continues to be the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live, learn, and teach on their ancestral homeland. It is an honor to host the Honorable Mahnaz Afkhami, who has graciously accepted my invitation to offer an overview of the other side of silence. Mahnaz is well known in the Iranian studies scholarly community and requires no introduction. First, however, briefly, I like to remind our guests that Mahnaz Afkhami is the founder and president of Women's Learning Partnership and the Foundation for Iranian Studies executive director. Previously, between 1976 to 1978, she was the Minister of Women's Affairs in Iran and the Secretary General of the Women's Organization of Iran, 1970 to 1978. Afkhami has been a leading advocate for women's rights for more than 4 decades. As Minister of Women's Affairs, she played a key role in the passage of the progressive 1975 family law in Iran, which dramatically increased women's rights in marriage, child rearing, and divorce. Mahnaz Afkhami has written and edited several books that have been translated into over a dozen languages. These include Feminist Advocacy, Family Law, and Violence Against Women, International Perspectives, 2018, Beyond Equality, a Manual for Human Rights Defenders, 2015, Victories Over Violence, Ensuring Safety for Women and Girls, 2011, Leading to Choices, a Leadership Training Handbook for Women, 2001, Claiming Our Rights, a Manual for Women's Human Rights Education in Muslim Societies, 1996, Faith and Freedom, Women's Human Rights in the Muslim World, published in 1995, Women in Exile, published in 1994, and In the Eye of the Storm, Women in the Post-Revolutionary Iran. Afkhami has received a number of awards, most notably the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Public Affairs Alliance of Iranian Americans, the 2019 International Trailblazer Award from Georgetown University Institute of Women, Peace and Security, the Shirzan Award for Lifetime Achievement for her 4 decades of visionary global work in civil society sector to advance women's human rights and agency, and the Walk of Courage Award from the Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services. As the editor of Iran Name, I had the honor of working closely with Mahnaz Afkhami and her husband, Ghulam Reza Afkhami. I like to take this opportunity to also salute Dr. Ghulam Reza Afkhami and wish him a speedy recovery. Please join me to welcome the Honorable Mahnaz Afkhami to the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies at the University of Toronto. Mahnaz Afkhami.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. Thank you. Thank you all. I want to just say hello to Ms. Mir-Djalali, who also, it's a pleasure to see. I just saw her. It's wonderful to have you here. It's been years since I saw you, and thank you for making all this possible. And hello, Mary. I didn't say before. Thank you for having me in this conversation. It's amazing to see some of the colleagues I haven't seen for a long time. It's such a treat. And and also at this moment, when I was writing this memoir, which took over 10 years, I wasn't aware that it would come out at a time when there is so much need for it. Because I was thinking to myself that because of the nature of the time and of the revolution and what happened afterwards, a lot of our material, a lot of our documents have been destroyed or gone or not in within access of many people. So it was my duty to tell the story of the women's movement in Iran that I witnessed, and also connected to the documents that I had been able to, not as much as Mohammed has, but anyway, as much as I could gather together from our friends in Iran and others, and with the oral history interviews that we did. So I thought it was a sort of a telling of a history for the future. I had no idea that the wonderful young people in Iran would be courageously rising up and, in effect, creating, to my thinking, the first global women's movement beginning in Iran. I really think that the timing of this and the way that it has been conducted through the use of technology, the use of social networking, the use of the diaspora to help make the communication about what's happening in Iran, all of that is to some extent, the result of the previous events that have happened for women and by women after the revolution, and especially in the last 2 decades. But it has also been a result of the awareness by many women across the world of the connectedness among us and of the horrific events that are happening to all of us, from pandemics to climate issues, to poverty, to wars, which seem to be unending. And we all share that across the world. Something happens in Ukraine and somebody goes hungry, or many bodies go hungry across the world. Somebody makes a mistake with the climate and somebody else has to live with the consequences. And also we have seen the deterioration of decision-making mechanisms that at least had a minimum of reason, a minimum of justification, and required a minimum of dialogue to be exerted. Now it's everyone for themselves, it seems. And I think that women are finally discovering that, as one of our documentaries from WLP is called, it's up to us. That honestly, we really have to sort of get in the act. Who are we looking to? There are no Abraham Lincolns, there are no Martin Luther Kings, there are no Gandhis, there are no Mandelas. We just have to get going. And it's not actually one or two leaders, it's the massive participation and thinking and working together that will do it. So I seriously think that this might be, if they don't really make it harder than it is, the movement will become even more global. I have, in all of my life working with women, never seen that members of a parliament in Europe stand up and pay respect to a group of people demonstrating in another country, especially a global South country. I've never seen the kind of response from governments as well as other people, other groups, other activists to their action. So I am hopeful that maybe this will bring us the kind of movement that we need for change across the globe, sort of a global women's movement. And I think that, we as Iranians and those who have studied Iran, who are with us here, know that we are sort of weird people, we are both brave when we need to be, we are talented, hugely talented, and we are also try new things and take a lot of time doing whatever it is that we believe in. And I think that sometimes we go wrong. Like, for instance, when the revolution happened in Iran, there were a lot of people, women participating. I was in the United States trying to work with the United Nations legal group to sign a contract on institution of INSTRA, the International Center for Research and Training for Women, the Global Institute in Iran. We already had brought the Regional Institute for Global South Women, and we had already been, the UN had already committed to 1980 conference in Tehran. So it was that kind of a time when Iran was at the center of movement building globally as well as locally. People would write me notes. We were in the demonstration, and this was like this, and excitement and so forth. And I was saying, "What in heaven's name are you doing?" But part of it was because of the horrific the use of what is called taqiyya. That is basically lying. You could lie if you thought it would get you closer to the success that you wanted. So taqiyya being used by the leader, the spiritual leader, whom I heard myself in New York when he was in France, talking about, I'm not going to be politically involved. I'm going to go to home and do my work. And he himself said that women are going to be okay. There's not going to be any limitations on women. So lo and behold, 3 weeks after he entered Iran in February 1979, during that 2 weeks, he annulled the family law and he brought in hijab and also segregation for women. And by 8th of March of the same year, women were the very first who got it. This was not going to work. And they came to the streets in huge numbers and tried to express their disapproval of what was being done. But unfortunately, it was just too much. It was for the first time in the world. I don't know, there's so many scholars here, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but so far as I have seen, there is nothing like the theocracy that we have in Iran anywhere else in the world. I mean, you have the Queen of England being the head of the church. You have the King of Morocco being the head of the mosque. You have the Vatican having the Pope. But the Vatican does not run Italy. the Queen doesn't run, the church doesn't run England. And this is a very unique kind of thing. That is a theocracy that actually manages or attempts to manage the country is a unique thing. That's why I'm saying we're weird people. We have something like that. And then we come up 40 years later with a global movement for women and for democracy and for liberty and for life and women. And that weirdness has bad causes, but generally it like the recent events, it can be life-saving for a lot of us and for maybe the entire planet. So just to say that this also did not happen by accident. Khomeini started it a long time ago in 1963. His first uprising was focused on women. Two things, women and land reform. Land reform because of the money that came in through land, and the giving that happened through donation of land, and women because he knew, and he's right, that actually when change happens in the status of women, especially in the family, the whole structures of patriarchy, which are up and up, down, and the whole system starts shaking. And in this, he had a lot of agreement with the others, because I remember now, you will forgive me because I'm not very systematic in doing these things, but I remember very well the first time that I presented as a minister to the cabinet. It was there were a couple of members of the cabinet who came out immediately talking about if you're going to have this kind of thing that what's her name is presenting, we are going to have all these structures, including the monarchy itself and including the king itself, fall apart. Which she was right. I mean, they were right in the sense that not in a negative way, but in the sense that once those structures within the family are pulled apart, that really changes everything, because all the other organizations that we have at the community level, at the school level, at the governmental level, all over, is based on that hierarchy, which we call patriarchal hierarchy. So anyway, I'm personally deeply proud of the young Iranian women. I'm grieved that they are facing such savagery, but at the same time, it is sort of the price that they are paying for the rest of us, and for bringing ideas about change, and about change in ways that are globally necessary right now, existentially necessary. And we have to give them all the support that we can. Just to go back to how this particular movement happened in recent times, I will give you a couple of examples that I personally had connections to. One was that at the very beginning with the demonstrations that a lot of our own people at the women's organizations were leading. That, of course, got nowhere. Later, we had during Khatami's term, we were we had a little bit more freedom, a little bit more possibilities of communication without huge danger. And we started bringing women outside, Iranian women outside. And by that time, we had started the Women's Learning Partnership. And the Women's Learning Partnership, which is the actually partnership of 20 organizations across 4 regions, and works in 28 languages in 60 other countries. So we have a lot of work that has come directly from Iran's experience in the past. And if we have time, I'll go through that as well. But right now, I wanted to focus more on this particular event, the movement that is happening right now. So we brought 10 of these young leaders of organizations, which were during a short period during Khatami possible to organize. They came to Thailand, which didn't need a visa. We hosted them there. And we were actually going there ourselves because of AWID, Association of Women in Development, which had a regular get together of some over 1,000 women from across the world. So they came there with us to participate also at AWID. And there they were interconnected with other partners, and our system of working, which is really based on shared experience and shared learning. And very much also focused on going from experience to theory, not from theory to experience. You see the understanding of WFP based on the previous experience in Iran is that when you go and speak with people, ordinary people or extraordinary, doesn't matter, any human across the globe, whether it's a textile factory, whether it is the cabinet, whether it is the agricultural village, when you ask them what do they want, what they respond is very much the items of the Declaration of Human Rights. There is hardly a right that somebody says, I don't want this right. They can say it if that right would take away some other right. They may have preferences, but nobody says, I don't want this right or the other. Everybody wants the same, the whole, expanse of rights. But when it comes to how do you implement those, of course, it's a matter of the historical context of each society and each setting. So you have to adapt and contextualize so that it works. And that is, for instance, I learned this personally the first time that I went to a textile factory in Isfahan. And I was full of the family law idea that we have to get women the right to divorce. We have to get women the right to work, the right to proper pay, and so forth. So I kept asking this woman who was working there, I kept asking her, are you interested? Would you be happy to have the right to divorce? And she kept saying, I get paid 25 tomans an hour. And I kept saying, how about the family law? Would you like a right to divorce? And she said, what would be the use of that if I get 25 tomans? Because I will have to basically leave my husband's house and go to my father's house. That's not helping me. If I'm not independent, that doesn't help me much. So it was a learning experience that had a great effect on me, that you have to see the rights are there. Of course she wants a right to divorce, but what she needs is to have economic independence based on education and skills building, to have continuity, and then also advocacy comes from this, and also other changes. So that's the background that came about, the learning that you have to learn from people themselves, and then theorize on the basis of that. Not theorize such as sometimes has been done in cultural relativity. It's a matter of cultural relativity only in the sense of letting people find their priorities. Not that this is the final thing that one wants, not the goal, but ways of implementing the ideal goal. So anyway, when we took these young women to Thailand, it was amazing. It was amazing how they related to others. It was so interesting how they learned from others. And how even then they looked, what impressed me was that they were so different from our usual members in Iran. They were just feistier, and they walked as if they're trying to prove something, that nobody's whatever, there was this really amazing, and the language too, that was also very interesting. A language that had not changed for God knows how many centuries very much, suddenly was evolving and changing. So there they became more interested in the way that the Moroccans had worked to get family law reform. And when they went back, and the advocacy for that, when they went back, they set up, not only as a result of that, but that was helpful. They went and started the 1 million signatures, which was an amazing movement. Nushin Ahmadi and Parvin Ardalan were responsible at first, and of course everybody got involved. They did door to door, they did all sorts of getting people to help. And one of the things that still exists, and it's so important in the movement in Iran, is that they included men. Out of every 3 signatures, 1 was from men. And that's hugely important in movement building, especially now in our world, because the women's movement contains every minority, every skin color, every religion, every form of disabled people. It's everybody. And also we train the next generation. The cultural context is given by the mothers. So we really can't afford to be focusing on silos. Though they're important, they should be paid attention to for the specific issue, but as a whole, we have a responsibility to ask, not as my old friend Bella Abzad was saying, we're going from 20% political participation to 30%. And then at some point she came to 50%. And we said, listen, we need the 100% because we are, representative of the entire human race, and it's not possible to have real change without including everyone and having dialogue with everyone. And the thing that impresses me so much is how these young people are not saying anything, that would separate the people from each other. It's life, women, liberty. Now we can, with a slight change in the translation, but that's what they're asking. So they're having a minimalized human rights declaration. So they're not getting people by calling themselves this particular political system or this particular. They're thinking first and foremost they have to be inclusive of all and have dialogue and conversation, and then at some point they will be able to work together to decide what it is, what kind of government it is that they want. So this is, I think, a very intelligent thing that they have taken up. But the 1 million signatures, of course, took into its bosom the writers and poets also. Simin Behbahani, for instance, was a very important figure in support of the movement. And that, is the heart of the Iranian people. Poetry is a great piece of it. And now what they are using is both poetry, song, and drama, images, all of it. So it's a very talented group that's doing all of this. And then after we of course translated Nushin's book, 1 Million Signature book, and we distributed it among our Russian and Central Asian, Latin American, and Middle Eastern colleagues, and it was a very useful kind of a reading for them, because it showed them how to get people who are not necessarily ready to change among the the legislative actors, how to convince them, how to dialogue with them, how to be able to make them more receptive. So, except that in Iran, forget it, anything having to do with women is impossible. The reason we could work at the time that we did was because the overview concept was industrialization, development, and at the same time, modernity. So if you thinking of those things, there's a lot of room for negotiation and for working to change things. But if at the beginning you're against all of that, what are you going to negotiate? You can't even negotiate from getting 9-year-old child not to be treated as a criminal or as an adult criminal. And then 13 is the minimum age of marriage. So anyway, they couldn't do anything much that way, but they learned hugely about how to organize, how to move forward with building structures that would be able to sustain itself. You know, it's not just a day or 3 days and forget it. Then it came the Green Movement, which was a reaction to false elections. That was also largely the women's thing. And the men came, but the women were the drivers of that. And later that spilled it to the Arab Spring. At all of the times, there were two groups of people in Iran among the women. One were the ones who thought possibly reform might be possible, and having had such a bad experience with revolution, they were ready for reform. And people like Nushin, for instance, who wouldn't come outside, you know, she said she doesn't want to not be able to go back. But there were others who thought that reform is no longer possible, and they just wanted revolution. So these two were there but they, as one of them who was here and I reviewed for oral history, she said, but we got along, you know, just as we got along with some of the religious people who for the first time felt comfortable in the outside, you know. We worked in specific areas where we were in agreement, and we tried to come to terms with each other, so they become much more receptive and so forth. So the Green Movement was another preparation for this, and I would say that technology and the possibility of communication has been an amazing factor in this movement becoming what it has become and what hopefully it will become. So the trajectory is really all toward success. And so I just wanted to say what I had personally experienced with this movement that Iranian women are following, but also tell you maybe a little bit about the other things that went into this, the movement building that the Women's Learning Partnership has been able to sustain, and which has had connections to the Iranian issue. I mentioned already the idea of from experience to theory, and I mentioned already the idea that the conceptual outlook is the same, but implementation needs to be contextualized by circumstances and by language and culture. The other elements that are most important, I think, and we have been able to have buy-in from the partners on that, is the idea that at the base of all of the rights movements for women is the sense of empowerment that we all have to feel. And unfortunately, it's not an easy thing. In the book, I start somewhere with Walt Whitman's poem, I celebrate myself and sing myself, and what I assume you shall assume. When I read this, I thought to myself, I couldn't say that, even though I know that some of the things that I want to say in that book or at any point are things that I've either seen or actually witnessed or I have documented. But I just don't have that courage that Whitman would have. And it comes from being a male, And so this is something we have to learn, to empower ourselves, to know that we can, do all of these things. Not only we can, but we must, because there isn't anyone else. The others have passed their tests and it hasn't worked so well. And well, in some things it has, and in some things it hasn't. So this sense of empowerment, and that sense of empowerment in our work, in our workshops, in groups that work together, is based on the idea that every human can be a leader and is a leader, in effect. Except that some are a leader at one point and a follower at another. And what has to happen is that people have to work with each other with respect and inclusion. It seems simple, it seems very ordinary, but it really isn't. I mean, if you look, you see in schools, the teacher knows best, says whatever, and the student takes notes. In the family, father knows best. Now, of course, it's much less that way, but it's still basically that. In work systems, the boss knows, and the others on the basis of need to know, So what we're talking about is change coming through collective work, beginning in the family, and with the idea of changing the architecture of human life. And that is very significant, because not only has that architecture in some ways limited women, but it has also limited men. When I see nowadays that the beginning of this movement has brought my son to be able to deal with his children in ways that are so satisfying and so emotionally important, and men haven't really had that. They are still, some of the older ones, especially that I deal with all the time, they don't have personal conversations. We have that to give, we have that to give. We at work, for instance, we talk about our personal experiences. We talk about how we're feeling. We pick up the phone talking to a friend we haven't seen for a long time. We start sharing quickly. So emotional attachment, being able to communicate in a personal way, to share ideas, emotional ideas, not just intellectual. These are things that we can bring, plus the fact that we are smart and we're talented and we have everything else. One thing we have to do is forget about what my friend Soraya Obaid, who was the only Saudi who became the Under Secretary General, she at the United Nations, she always says we should forget about the Bermuda Triangle, not think of ourselves from the waist down. And we always have, unfortunately, had to do this. That is, we always are focusing on our reproductive function. And the very far right and the very far left are even more emphasizing that, while we have so much more to give, so much brain power, so much all kinds of talents. Okay, the reproductive part is also important, and that's the part that has been cause for a lot of hostility and a lot of violence and all of that. We have to work with that, but it's not all we are. We really have to have a broader view of that. And the book that Mohammed kindly mentioned, Beyond Equality, is what we are thinking of as the way forward, because the planet and the existential situation of the world is such that we need change. We cannot do it without the entire population, and especially by sharing the positive points of both genders and trying to bring it together in the best possible way so that we can make change happen. And I think the Iranians, young people, have actually some of the answers that we need to be able to succeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahnaz, for an excellent summary and highlights of your book, The Other Side of Silence. I encourage all of you, all of our colleagues, to order the book and read it carefully, particularly those who are interested in the unfolding of women's movement in Iran. Mahnaz Afkhami has generously agreed to engage with questions from our guests. And we have a number of colleagues who are working on women-related issues, and I would like you to join us in a conversation with Mahnaz. Any questions? Let me see.
Yes, I have a question.
All right. Professor Hillman, please.
I've studied Iranian women's writing in America and in Iran for years. Haven't reached any conclusions because I'm not actually an expert in women's studies. But I wonder if, when you talk about in empowering women, that women need to have more confidence in expressing themselves, do women in Iran today have pre-20th century sisters, which American feminists talk about, sisters that could have inspired them to have that confidence because they had done it before? Or have women, primarily in Iran, had to invent self-confidence for themselves, even in a period in the early 20th century when, if they were producing poetry, for example, their father or their brother wouldn't let it get published then, or they were under the protection of males, you said, husbands and fathers, or they had the kind of personality that Parveen Ehtesami had. Where in Iranian culture might women, other than being encouraged by what's going on now or some of the things that went on in the Pahlavi period, where would they find indigenously in Iranian culture that kind of spark that would make it natural for them to have self-confidence? And before you give an answer, I have a little text here that I was reminded of when you talked about Walt Whitman's Song of Myself. And I immediately thought, well, that's right. From 1850s to 1880s, Walt Whitman had this stuff to say, and Emily Dickinson at the same time had just much of importance to say, but she said it at home, personally, privately, and didn't have the self-confidence to do it in public. And there's a famous poem by Sarah Teasdale, the same period, where she says, 8 lines, "I might have sung of the world and said what I heard them say of the vast and passing dream of today and yesterday. But I chose to tell of myself, for that was all I knew. I have made a chart of a small sea, but the chart I made is true."
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful.
So there's my question. I also have a comment that might go into the question. Might it be enough in some cases for women just to make the personal political, rather than engage in the political of the menfolk, which we recognize after 2,500 years hasn't brought us to where we'd like to be? Anyway, I talk too much. But...
No, it's wonderful.
Thank you.
And thank you for that poem. I hadn't seen it before. I would love to see it. That's wonderful. So I tell you, with regards to the first part of your question, I really seriously think that the women in Iran right now even though they're very young and they themselves had not directly experienced what we were doing together, 1 million a year, at the time when the whole population was 30 million. But, I think that once the idea, that people become conscious of rights, once that happens, it's very difficult to take it back or nullify it. And that had happened to a large portion of the Iranian women before. But I know that my own grandma, 100 years ago, was a Baha'i. And she was married, she was an Afisi. And she was in a intellectual kind of a family. But nevertheless, because she went and took up the Baha'i faith out of her own willfulness, they made her husband to divorce her. But she went and became a tailor and had a group of women working for her in her house, and was the first entrepreneur in Kerman, And Kerman, of course, wasn't a very advanced city and all of that. So there is that also. There are people, they're not maybe massive number of them, but she was the kind of person who did that. And also my mom, she had a huge feudal kind of a household in which she could have everything she wanted, but she decided to leave and take the kids back to the United States, and she worked in a cannery, the night shift, to go through school. And I got paid $1.25 an hour to work in the dime store, But let me tell you quickly this: in the dime store that I work, and this is part an anecdote from the book. In the dime store that I work, I was at the notions counter, and there was stuff on that counter that I didn't know what they are. Stuff, needles, and this and that and the other. And my boss was called Rose. She was an Italian American, and she hated university students who come and work part-time, Nevertheless, he kept telling me, and I was Ibrahimi, my last name. She called me Abenini. She said, Abenini, get a move on, Are you going to ever do anything worthwhile, and so forth. But once they fired me so that they could not give me my holiday pay, she told me, Abenini, you should go to the union, to the workers' union. And I said, where is it? And she showed me where. And I went, and they came and they, got my rights back. And that, for instance, had such an amazing impact on me, that organizing, togetherness, working together makes such a difference. So I'm thinking that there were families, there were groups who happened to have weird people like us in it. And there were others who had more traditional, and even in our own family, my other grandma was very, proper and whatever. So, but then, 100 years before them, there was Qurrat al-Ain in Iran. So there's some of that, and some of it is just learned by living the life that organizations and institutions help you create for yourself. So I think it's a combination of the two that creates the kind of thing that we see today. I don't know whether I.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. That was excellent. Gonha, please go ahead.
Thank you, Professor Tawakkoli. Hello, Professor Mahnaz. My name is Gonha Kim, and I'm a student of Professor Mohammad Tawakkoli. And thank you for your great talk, and I really enjoyed a lot, hearing your talk. The one thing I would like to ask you is that what the women's movement in Iran very special is that there are so many men also taking part in that movement. As you said, 1 million signature movement, there were also lots of men taking part in it. And also nowadays women life freedom movement we can see like lots of men like participating in those movements. So I wondered like why you think like Iranian men take part in those movements, or like what makes like Iranian women special to make men to join the movement. Like I heard from Professor Tavakkoli about the idea of Iran as a matriarchic society, but I kind of curious like of your thoughts on this phenomenon, because like in Korean setting, like it's so special that men like also take part in like women's movements. And yeah, could you share your thoughts or like personal experience like related to that point?
Yeah, I think it's a absolute necessity for the kind of movement that is needed right now in the world, that we work together. I mean, the fact that and then we learn how to be activists without being sort of narrow-minded or not understanding that the same thing that has created patriarchy has created our attitude as well. You know, men didn't decide they were going to just hit people, women, or be nasty to them or whatever. It was a structure, a culture, a way of doing things, and it was all encompassing. You know, all of you know, like art, religion, everything supports it. You know how many James Bond movies or Rita Hayworth and Glenn Ford, I'm showing my age, but if you ever saw Rita Hayworth and Glenn Ford beat Rita Hayworth and she thought, oh, how sexy. But these create this, and now we have to recognize that in America especially, that silos by themselves, small groups, is not going to bring us the world we need, and that we have to work together with men to do it. And Iranian women have discovered it, and they're really great at it. And the ones that we worked with and give trainings to before, most of them are out here, you know, trying. They are head of organizations right here in America now. The second group of exiles, which we've again gotten oral histories of, and they are in connection as well with what's inside. So the connection, the communication, the technology helps a great deal as well, you know, that to bring that closeness.
Thank you very much. We had a hand up from Nusha Keizad. Nusha, are you still there?
I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
All right. Yes, please.
Thank you so much for your talk, which resonated, I think, with how so many of us are not just thinking, but feeling about Iran right now. I like the previous comment. I'm interested in what you were saying about that this movement being moving and inspiring because it's truly intersectional, and that includes Muslims, right? Because I've seen so many images and memes of unveiled and veiled women holding hands. Professor Tavakkoli and I were actually having a conversation about this last week of Iranian women's reclamation of Islam through this movement and